Thank you so much for joining us. Tom Jeffries here at HowStreet.com's YouTube channel. It's a real pleasure to be at the Agora Wealth Symposium 10th Annual. But looking forward to a face-to-face meeting with this gentleman. I've talked to him a number of times on the phone. It's great to have him here. Mr. Frank Holmes, of course, is the president of U.S. Global Investors. Mr. Holmes is one of the best-known entrepreneurs and also a market economist that we know in the business. Good to see you in Vancouver, Mr. Holmes.
It's great to be here.
Finally met the man from the deep at the heart of Texas. Let's talk a big picture story here first. November, we saw a lot of our metals, we saw a lot of our equities in general, Frank, just get hammered. We're starting on the way back. How are you looking at precious metals right now? Are you feeling pretty good about them?
You know, I'm feeling much better about resources in particular, and one has to put in context what took place last year. We did have massive deleveraging, and we had banks forcing, there was basically $1 trillion redemption fee that was pushed on hedge funds, forced to liquidate, and a lot of them were long commodities and natural resources and emerging markets. So you saw as they dumped these particular commodities and emerging market stocks, they had to pay back US loans, right, and the US dollar became the strongest currency in the world. That's all now changed, and I think the big factors to see is that is to follow the government policies. So what we do at US Global is that we look at the G7 and E7, and we like to compare the strongest economies of the world, the biggest economies, was the G7, compared to the E7, the emerging economies, the 7 most populated countries in the world. Those 7 countries represent 50% of the world's population and only 15% of GDP. It's the exact opposite to the G7. So what we notice is when you look at government policies, it's actually quite simple: monetary or fiscal policy. Monetary policy is interest rates, money supply. Fiscal policy is tax and spend. And you can see that governments that have infrastructure policies are the ones that are creating the demand for the commodities, and in particular Asia. And when we track that, you can all of a sudden see changes. Now, one of the things that hurt last year was not only the liquidation that was taking place with banks, but there was a money supply contraction. And the correlation of money supply and the demand for oil is about 86% of the time positive.
Interesting to know.
So what we kept saying last year on television, that we could understand oil over $100 a barrel, 120, because money supply in China and America and Europe was in fact contracting. And that spike was bizarre. And then we saw the crash, and it went down to under $40 a barrel. Well, since then, we've seen a huge increase in money supply, and that's a key factor for oil prices rising and the basic commodities. Then you saw about $800 billion ex-Japan out of Asia committed to infrastructure spending and money being borrowed and spent. Unlike in the US, there still is this money contraction taking place. Money supplied by the governments in the market, but the banks have cut back on credit cards. Banks have cut back in many other processes where you can get loans. So you're not seeing the huge velocity in money that you're seeing in China. I think that that we're going to go forward, and we're going to have this different volatility that's taking place. The dangers of populist policies, the difference between, say, America and the UK and versus China. The populist policies in Asia is to create jobs and to have social stability. The populist policies in America today is justifying jealousy, encouraging envy, creating a class war, and that creates protectionism and unionism. That will lead to inflation. Otherwise, we believe that gold's going to trade higher on deflation. And we believe that governments are going to continue to print money and monetize their currencies, and that gold will slowly climb to higher price. And the ETFs have seen this shift that the central bankers who hate gold, because gold basically demonstrates they have poor policies, that the ETFs are being owned by investors. And so that's the new central bank we see.
You talk a lot in your writings about the societal changes we're facing, but also one thing I noticed here is a generational change. People of my age, I won't say how old I am, over 40, have a different mindset than the kids coming up, say, the last 20 years. They've never seen hard times, Frank. They've never, and the brokers out there, a lot of them are young guys, young guns that have never seen a downturn. Is there a generational myopia to some of the things that are happening, you think, in the current conditions?
Yes, and I think that one has to also witness that for these young people who have not seen this adversity you're talking about, is that the formation of capital has changed. And that's very significant. Basically you're seeing more and more of the media, and then you're seeing regulators come in, that anyone that touches money is bad.
Yeah, it's interesting.
And so you're seeing such an ominous amount of regulations like Sarbanes-Oxley, the shift that took place. And it was wise that Canada didn't embrace it to the degree, because it was really a love fest and a fee fest for lawyers and accountants. And when you go back and they blame it was Enron and it was WorldCom, well, you know, Enron had over 200 lawyers working for them internally. Not one lawyer was implicated. None of the lawyers that they used to create those special purposes that reviewed all their documents, none of them were implicated. But anyone that was financial, CEO, et cetera, they're all bad. And so you're seeing that that's changing this formation of capital where the entrepreneurs pooled capital together to create things. So I think that that's an important factor so that it prohibits a lot of young people to go and be entrepreneurs to create jobs. Because the model is basically much more prone to support big corporations where all the financial problems have had. It hasn't been small investment people that have caused these problems, or banks. It's been the Citigroups of the world.
I don't want to get into numbers because it's hard to, you don't have a crystal ball, but I've heard numbers off books, derivative numbers have been bandied around $300 trillion, $500 trillion. What role have SIVs, these fancy new derivatives, played in our current, for lack of a better word, economic maelstrom, Frank?
You know, there's a wonderful book called The $1 Trillion Meltdown, and now it's like $2 trillion meltdown. And I highly recommend people read the book to better appreciate the numbers and the magnitude. He does a wonderful job explaining the history of the growth in derivatives. And I think if you want good regulation, then you have to force these derivatives to go be listed and to create a consistency and force the banks to create that transparency. I think that will change a lot of this. But the real issue was good intentions policies. You know, in America, to allow people and everyone to get a chance to buy a house. Democrats proposed it, but it was a Republican Congress. So this whole thing all of a sudden in the 90s gets all morphed out, that people can buy a house and not be held accountable and walk away. If it goes up, they take the money. If it goes down, they walk away. And you take a look at America and the UK, they both allowed this policy, but in Canada it's not so. In most emerging countries, you have to have money down. And if you walk away from your property, you're going to be held accountable and be chased. So is it really Wall Street's the fault of all this? Or is it good intentions of poor policies with good intentions? So I think that one has to take a look at when governments start really addressing poor policies and refixing them, then I think that Europe and North America will go through a new generation.
Sure hope so. Looking at what's happening in some people say the 8th largest economy in the world, some people say California is the 6th largest economy in the world. Is that a canary in the coal mine, or is, as you explained, a change in the way our financial structures basically run? Because I look at it as basically on the cover, it's like, I can't believe this is paying. They're paying it with IOUs, Frank? It doesn't sound good.
It doesn't sound good, and that has happened before. It's a very much a sort of a socialist mindset. As a government, there's so many government employees. There has to be a restructuring. There has to be basically rethinking about a lot of the administrators of what they have in California. Also, there was this huge bubble in the real estate where people were buying 3 houses and everyone wanted to be a mini Donald Trump, and it's imploded.
Yeah. It's been a delight, even for a short time, to have you here, and it's great to have you back in Vancouver. Our guest has been Frank Holmes. Mr. Holmes and his team, by the way, are working, of course, the U.S. Global Investors Incorporated. Just put it in Google or Frank Holmes, you'll find his good work. It's great to have you in town. Thank you for all your good work and your guidance. Frankly speak, you've saved my a couple of times. Thank you, Frank.
Thank you.
Frank Holmes. My name's Tom Jeffries. Mr. Holmes and I are at the Hotel Vancouver, part of Agora Wealth Symposium's 10th anniversary, A Decade of Wrecking. On behalf of Mr. Holmes, I'm Tom Jeffries at Howe Street, here on YouTube. Good to have you with us, and thank you.
Comments made on Howe Street Video and HoweStreet.com are an expression of opinion only and should not be construed in any matter whatsoever as recommendations to buy or sell any financial instrument at any time. Available online at HoweStreet.com. Howe Street Video is a production of Howe Street Media Incorporated.